All right, Mr. Davis, we are in a live meeting now.
Good evening, everyone. It's a special meeting for the Amity Board of Education on December 5th. It is 6:03 as I call the meeting to order. I'd like to first do introductions. Dr. Byers, maybe it would be easier if you focused on getting that done.
Sure, absolutely. So I think what we'll do is we'll just introduce our board members to our panelists first, and then I can give a brief introduction to our panelists. I know they have a slide built into their presentation where they tell a little bit more of their background. But Mr. Davis, if you want to start, and then maybe we can do our Orange folks, our Woodbridge people, and then our Bethany person.
Sounds good. Paul Davis, Board Chair.
Christina Levere, Policy Chair.
Carla Eichler.
Shannon Carlson.
All right. Pat and Donna, it's on to you.
Patrick Reed.
Donna Schuster.
And Dr. Turner.
And Jenny Turner.
And then also apparently joining us off camera, at least temporarily, are Sean Hartshorn and Chris Brow. So with us this evening, I have essentially the two people who've been my professors for this past semester on school finance operations. By way of kind of history, during the summertime, we received invitations through, actually it came through a bunch of different places. I know CAPS had an invitation, CABE had an invitation, and I'm assuming the Connecticut Council for Municipalities or somebody must have put an invitation out to attend a presentation on school finances and sort of the administration of school budgets. And I know actually at the time, it wasn't really specific or directed just at superintendents or schools. So the first selectman, Bethany, as well as the Bethany town business manager attended the presentation in addition to myself. So it really was kind of an open forum for people to learn about school finances. And since that time, I have joined the class at the University of New Haven, where both Frank and Pam have been teaching that. And I am really going to turn the evening over to them and let them walk you through a very similar presentation to what we all viewed back in August, with a little bit of customization for Amity. I know the intent is for them to be able to go through the presentation. It's a little hard, right, when the screens are up and we're presenting to see questions. So if you can kind of hold on to questions until the end, and then we'll sort of get back to our tic-tac-toe board format here, and then we'll be able to have a Q&A session. But I will let Pam and Frank take it away.
Sounds great. Thank you. My name is Pam Mangini, and I'm joined here this evening by my colleague, Frank Connolly. And I will start off by saying my voice might sound a little bit strange, but I am just recovering from COVID. So hopefully my voice will last for the evening. Please bear with me. I was sharing with Jen that I work for another school district and our central office is like, we're dropping like flies. It's not a good time. And we're just hoping to make those 3 weeks until the holiday break. But we're hanging in there. I'm going to take a moment and I'm going to share my screen. And what we are hoping to share with you this evening is some information on the critical financial hotspots. We're really excited to have this opportunity to share some of the information. We did try to tailor it a little bit more to what you face as a regional school district. It is a little bit different of an animal than regular local educational agencies. And I have worked with 2 other regional school districts in the past, so I am a little bit more familiar with it. Between Frank and I, we bring a whole lot of experience to you, both on the town side as well as the Board of Education side. So we're going to just a moment or two, just introducing ourselves a little bit more so that you know who we are and the experience that we have. I personally come with over 40 years of experience working in the public sector. I began working for the town of Hamden in support staff roles in 1980. And I've worked as an account clerk handling AP, AR, and payroll. I moved on to work as an administrative assistant for the local police chief, handling budget as well as operational areas. And I then spent time working as an executive assistant to the mayor, dealing with operational and budgetary issues townwide. I'm also a very proud graduate of Amity High School, and I won't tell you what year. But I also then moved on and completed my bachelor and master degrees from Quinnipiac University, and I did that as an adult, and ultimately became the town finance director for the town of Orange. So I've spent over 25 years working on the town side of government, and then I crossed over to the Board of Ed, and I've been with 5 districts over the past 17 years. And as I said, that includes 2 regional school districts. I also served as an elected official for the town of Wallingford. I was chair of the Board of Education. I served 3 terms on the board. And I share that with you because I think you will see that I really do have a clear understanding of the various perspectives surrounding us in municipal government, not only from the town side, but from the board side, as well as our town leaders' viewpoints. And again, I look forward to sharing some thoughts with you this evening about boards of education financial issues. And I will now introduce my very accomplished colleague, Frank Connolly, who can share some of his background as well.
Thank you, Pam. My background is I started on the town government side, and I worked as town manager of Coventry, town manager of Newington, town manager of North Branford for over 25 years between those 3 towns. And then I was the interim executive director for the town of Hamden on civil service. And then I went over to what my colleagues refer to as I went to the dark side, and I switched over to the Board of Education. And so I started working with the Stonington Board of Education full time. And when I left the Stonington Board of Ed, I then started to get phone calls from different towns to work as the interim. And so I wound up in interim positions. These we generally run 4 to 5, 6 months at a clip. Rocky Hill, North Haven, Killingly, Ansonia, Tolland, Thompson, Monroe, Danbury, and Jamoke Academy. And so over the last, I'd say 12 years, I've worked in all these different towns. A couple of them I've worked in at least 2 times. Rocky Hill, Ansonia, Tolland. I've been back there a couple of times now. And then I took a lot of the information I got and I created a couple books. Local Government Connecticut, which is a textbook on local government, how local government is supposed to operate, all the rules and regulations, what it is. And then when I finished that, I started my novel, Inside Town Hall, which I sometimes refer to as how town hall really sometimes does operate. So anyway, it's been quite a ride between the town government side and the Board of Ed side. As Pam pointed out, with both of us having municipal experience and Board of Education experience, it really is an eye opener. And we're going to go over with you some of the differences we found between the 2 sides.
And Frank, I will handle our PowerPoint, and you can tell me when you want me to move the slides for you.
Next slide, please.
Yes.
One of the things both Pam and I have learned is minefields. With our experience has come a number of bruises that we've all incurred. And there's hidden agendas inside Board of Education finances also, and there's financial minefields to watch out for. Okay, Pam, next one. And then just a couple of them. Superintendent can have a weak principal or a department head, but the headline grabber is finance. If the finance goes south, all hell breaks loose. And what I found is superintendents are educators who have come up through the ranks with different levels of responsibilities. But the promotion from being a principal to a superintendent is a whole new brave world. Suddenly, it's the political world with having 7 to 9 bosses or more, such as in the Amity system. Massive financial responsibilities for the entire school district. And then to that, you add the reporting to town officials on budgets and expenditures and the extensive state reporting requirements. So it really is a massive learning curve. I've dealt with a number of superintendents that just came out of graduate school with their 093, and we spent a lot of time basically helping to train them on some of the idiosyncrasies of being a superintendent. So, okay, Pam?
Okay, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the next couple of slides, and it's just an overview for budgeting. I realize that you are probably just beginning all that fun season. I know we have been working diligently in my district as well. And I will tell you that there are definitely some nuances of a school district's budget. I think that some of the very distinct differences aren't always recognized by our counterparts on the town side. And I use myself as a perfect example. With 25 years of experience dealing with budgets, municipal budgets, particularly on the town side initially, when I went over to the dark side and joined my first Board of Ed, I was really taken aback by those differences and the things that I really initially didn't understand. And school budgets are truly the blueprint that guides teaching and learning. We certainly put together a plan on the town side, but it's a more critical financial plan on the Board of Ed side. And it's important that we work towards developing a budget that best balances limited resources, which we all know are becoming more and more limited. And our goal is to make certain that they are tied to what our hopes are and our goals for student achievement. So I think it's interesting that as we consider some of the questions you see here, that this really comes from the AASA, which is the School Superintendents Association. And they pose these questions in their School Budget 101 presentation about school budgets as they recognize the importance of top-level school administrators' need to understand budgeting. And I do take that a step further because we work closely with our Board of Eds and we are a team. It's important that we share that information and we all have the same understanding to make certain that we're all working in the same direction. School leaders, of course, have the challenging task of managing the available resources, both financial and human, and that's very important when we talk about board budget, with their educational initiatives. They must monitor and evaluate their budgets and use this information to guide their future decisions and to guide their board in where they want to lead the district. So who is involved in the school budget? I think it does begin with our building administrators, working with faculty and staff to identify and communicate needs to the district office, and the superintendent. And as the superintendent's proposed budget is developed, it's reviewed numerous times between the superintendent and your chief financial officer. And they are meeting with building and department administrators to make certain that they're capturing those key initiatives that really are going to drive the goals that you want to meet. And then, of course, it comes to the Board of Ed for review and possible revisions. And often with many public budget workshops, which provide the community an opportunity for input prior to that board-approved budget being finalized. And then in towns that are regional school districts, and some other towns as well, actually do a vote. In a town that has a local educational agency, that's where you might have a Derby or a Stratford, where they actually just go to the town with their budget proposal and wait for an appropriation. That adds another layer to the process in that oftentimes that budget is not approved at what was requested. And we're often going back to the drawing board in June, trying to figure out how to live within a budget that is less than we had requested. And I do recognize with regional school districts, you're also going through the possibility of more than one referendum. But that's always a struggle as well. So you're going back to reevaluate what has been presented as well. The role and purpose of a school budget is that it does represent a district's financial and operational plan for a school year. And it should be aligned to district goals and reflect how available resources will be used to support programs, operations, and objectives. And it's interesting because though budgets are common in most businesses, of course, the budget process for school districts include noticeable differences that impact how districts actually allocate and prioritize funds. And school budgets are spent in a different way. While the budgeting function, again, is common across professional sectors, the budget process in public schools has noticeable differences that impact how districts allocate and prioritize those funds in areas such as salaries and benefits. For a private organization, salaries and benefits may make up 35 to 40% of their entire budget. But in a public school system, on average, it's more than double that amount. It could easily be 80% of your budget. And add to that the budget challenges that the district has maybe 10 or 15% remaining that actually has to handle all the state and federal and local mandates related to school districts, from everything from facilities to class size requirements. So that each of these questions alone could be an entire session on its own, we do hope to provide you a little bit of insight here that notes the specifics that vary not only between the town and districts, but between districts overall. So that brings us to the major categories of school budget. And for those of you that have served on the board for a while, I'm sure you have seen that these are the major areas that you are looking at throughout your budget, particularly staffing. As we just said, we know that's a significant part of all of our Board of Education budget. Benefits, very tenable and always changing. Health insurance, we're always looking for those renewal numbers and watching those claims. Transportation, and of course, special education, which can oftentimes make or break a budget because it is so volatile and very difficult to anticipate. With regard to health insurance, I just think it's an interesting point to note. I often share with my town leaders as well as my boards of education, particularly when they may not think we're being as efficient, perhaps, or trying to pare down our budget as much as they would like us to. And I often remind them that with health insurance, for example, we're always dealing with estimates, and there's many variables that affect our budget. If we, any one of us in the Board of Education, truly budgeted for every single person, employee who is entitled to take our health insurance, our total budgets would be significantly higher. We, as school business officials, start off by taking historical data from people who we know, employees who take our plans, whether they're family plans or single plans, and we budget accordingly. However, we usually do put some room in there because we know historically there might be 20 people who go from a single, get married during the year, and now they're a two-person, or have a child and now they're a family plan. Those impact your budget. There's associated with that. So it's really important, I think, first to understand that, and secondly, to make certain that you're communicating that with the individuals that are involved with not only helping support the budget, but all the stakeholders, the taxpayers, the town leaders. And you as a regional school district have so many of those stakeholders in between the three different towns that I do think it's very important that type of information is shared. And I will talk a little bit more about those kinds of variables later. And I also think that it's important to note that there are many challenges that come from union contracts and the ever-changing number of special education students and their corresponding needs. But it's also important to note that as we are putting together this budget, more than likely we are working in 3 fiscal years at once. We are completing an audit for the previous year, and all of this overlaps during the same time frame. We are managing the current operating budget, and we are developing the new budget. And I have to admit, there's occasions when I really have to stop and think, now, what year are we in? What fiscal year am I developing? So it does get very intense at times, and it's important that information is timely, it's really thought out, and that it's communicated well. So while the budgeting process involves the review of estimated expenditures balanced against projected revenues that, of course, we are assessing and reviewing throughout the year, I'm sure you're beginning to see that there are a number of variables that will affect that balance. There are those wonderful, costly federal and state mandates that seem to continue. I know there's a couple out there right now that PACS is really trying to aggressively pursue and share some important information with the state about the financial impact of them. And the school district, we know, has an obligation to the taxpayers to represent that responsible plan that's fiscally responsible, but still offers a high level of educational excellence that certainly the district has traditionally provided. And it's also important to note that this budget process can easily span over 8 months in its development. So your final estimates that are approved in May actually do reflect, more than likely, your estimates back maybe from October and November, and you do try to update them as you move through the budget process, but they do leave opportunities for change as the fiscal year begins. And as a regional school district, you are following state statute, and you do have to present your budget on that first Monday in May. And again, there are variables that are going to affect your budget numbers, and I will chat about that a little bit more later on. But the goal of all our budgets is to maintain and expand those educational opportunities for our students in a fiscally responsible manner to our taxpayers. And I can honestly say I really have been doing this for a while. I work with school business officials throughout the state and very sincere in trying to accomplish that main goal in budgeting. Frank, I'll turn this over to you.
Okay, just a little levity here. Sometimes the view of the Board of Education budget requests, and it's always the year of austerity. I don't know if I ever came across a budget that it wasn't an austere year. I don't remember any. So, okay, Pam, next one. And then our revenue sources, local funds, local revenues, property taxes, various different groups vying for the same limited budget dollars. Taxpayers insist that government do more with less. And then we have a lot of federal grants that come in, continued reduction in federal money as forced programs and salaries to the general fund, a shift in grants, although we did have some temporary grants coming in because of COVID. And then we have state aid. ECS funding, excess cost grants, and alliance funding. And when I do presentations, I'm amazed that some of the basic stuff that we take for granted, Board of Ed or town officials may not fully understand the difference between ECS and who has legally obligated to keep that money versus the excess cost grant, who's legally obligated to take that money versus alliance. And we'll go over those details in a minute. Back to you, Pam.
I just wanted to highlight the differences with the regional school district. Most LEAs, local education agencies, receive their appropriation from the town. Of course, when you're a regional school district, your state grants come directly to school district. You also balance your budget from your revenue side based on funds received from various sources. Every school district is a little bit different, but for the most part, it's usually interest income, the carryover funds from the previous year by statute, tuition revenue, building rental income, and parking fees. And also the town tax revenues make up that balance from your member towns, and it's offset by the state educational cost sharing grant funds that are received directly by the towns. And that should really pretty much explain it, so you would think. However, when you really do break it down and you take a look, this is just a sample of a budget that perhaps is about $40 million. It's a regional school district, and it's offset by things like state federal grants, including the excess cost grant, which is estimated based on your current special education high cost students, and then various other offsets to it. You're estimating interest income. You're actually even estimating your carryover. So this remaining balance after all of those other revenue sources is what's divided by the 3 member towns in the case of Amity, and it's based on your actual student enrollment. And these proportional payments, less the ECAS grant, represent the net cost to each member town that is paid through property taxes. I think what happens oftentimes is that we don't necessarily, as town leaders and just as stakeholders, understand that these are estimates, even on the revenue side. And again, they can change. They are variables that are going to affect that year-end balance, either positively or negatively. And to Dr. Byers' comment earlier about the enrollment shifting perhaps a bit, where Orange may be decreasing for next year, you would think that would be an automatic savings to Orange, but that really does depend upon what's happening in the other towns. And I think that's a concept that is often misunderstood. So it's really important, again, that we get information out as clearly as possible, as transparent as possible, because it's a significant impact to our towns. They are getting a lot of great educational opportunities for their students for this investment, but we need to be able to share that with them. And Frank, I think you're going to talk a little bit about these grants.
Yes, thank you, Pam. The ECS educational cost sharing, this is a very basic grant to offset costs of local education, goes directly to the municipality to offset taxes. And a lot of Board of Ed members don't realize that this is money that goes directly to the town, and it basically is an offset. And I've been in arguments with town officials when I show them in their own budget how much money they're getting, and that the Board of Education budget is not all based on property tax because they have the offsetting revenue because ECS going directly to the town, and the town keeps that as an offsetting revenue. Excess cost grants. Excess cost grant is probably one of the most misunderstood of the grants that come through. And that reimburses the Board of Ed for extraordinary high expenditures in special ed. The statutes are quite clear. They specify these funds go to the Board of Ed within 30 days of receipt of the money from the state. But sometimes there's an agreement between the town and the town to have the town keep the money, and sometimes there's no guarantee, but towns keep the dollars anyway. I was in one town where the town kept the money with no agreement between the Board of Ed. And when I did a 5-year analysis of the Board of Education's budget, each year it was going up and up and up. But special ed was the major component of the budget going up. And the town just kept getting more and more revenue. And the town counted that as a revenue. And when I pointed this out to the Board of Education, it wasn't a pretty picture. And then we finally had to come to a formal agreement between the town and the Board of Ed, how we're going to handle that excess cost, which is supposed to go to the Board of Ed to offset the expenditures. If you're going to spend more money, you're going to receive more money back. Regional school districts receive these funds directly and budget net of these costs, a good way of doing it, which should be a benefit, but sometimes this creates issues as the grant amount can create an unexpected increase in revenue. We're doing budgets in the spring and we're always calling the state, how much do you anticipate the revenue is going to be? How much is reimbursement we're going to get this year? 70%, 72%, 75%? And you don't know. We generally work with the numbers in the governor's budget, but that can change when the General Assembly finishes it. So these are knowns in the grants, and you have to particularly pay close attention to them. So back to you, Pam.
And we just thought it was important to highlight this area as well. Grants such as Title I, IDEA are provided to districts for supplemental purposes and cannot be used to supplant general operating budgets. School districts must adhere to this federal supplement versus supplant concept and provision. It's actually called the SNS, federal provision. And you have to ensure that grant funds are actually used to enhance your programs and services. They can't be used to supplant or basically to pay for items or services that the school district already obligated with local funds. So in essence, you should not be taking your general operating budget because you got an increase perhaps in your Title I funding and say, well, maybe now we can remove some of these positions and put them into Title I. That's actually supplanting, and it is not allowed under these guidelines. But oftentimes it is difficult to help your town leaders in particular understand that when they see that there's a lot of grant monies coming. I've struggled with this in a number of districts and tried to help my counterparts on the town side understand that we are abiding by the laws, both federal and state, when we are trying to establish our grant budgets in such a way that truly are going to enhance those educational opportunities for our students. Thanks.
One of the things we have, the role of the governing body, town controls all the operations and finances of all the town departments except the Board of Ed. The Board of Ed is both a town agency and a state agency. And most town members and selectmen take their jobs very seriously. Some prefer to play the political game. In the long run, okay, Pam? The end of the year budget balances are much, much better than the end of the year deficits. And so you're jiggling with your numbers, you come down to the end, and you've got two major woodchucks in the pile: special education and health insurance. And these are the ones that can knock you for a loop. Special to special ed, if you have a child that comes in after May 1st and you don't get the reimbursement in that fiscal year, it creates real problems. And health insurance, I've dealt both with self-insured programs and then paid insurance programs. And if you're self-insured, it can be absolutely dynamite. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that and the importance of how to protect when you're self-insured. Back to you, Pam.
When you are self-insured in particular, it's really important to have a board policy that formally adopts the process you will follow in establishing your reserve fund, and even going as far as formalizing the amount that you should have in that reserve fund. And by that, I don't mean that, a $10,000 amount or $100,000 amount, but a percentage. Or if there's an issue one particular year when you've had a really bad claim experience, is that permissible now to go back into that reserve? Or how are you going to replenish that reserve? And when you have good years, do you continue to fund the reserve with the funding you may have from your budget? Or do you choose to use that elsewhere? And I think as boards change and as SBO, school business officials and superintendents change, the mindset may change. But this is a critical area that I really think is important that you do have a formalized policy. And self-insured most often is the more cost-effective option. And it can save districts a lot of money. You don't have to pay the same taxes that a fully insured plan does. No carrier, what we call fat, built into the rate. The commissions are set up differently, but there is more risk and less predictability. Obviously, you don't have that set dollar amount. You're actually paying on your claims. You do have your stop loss and you have your various insurances to protect you. But there are years when you could truly end up having a very bad year and a very costly year. And you can have years that are absolutely great. From my experience and my education from some of the brokers I've worked with, they have a theory that if you've had like 3 or 4 good years, you can almost count on a bad year coming in that year. And it really, when you're self-insured, requires real discipline in budgeting and making certain that you are holding those medical reserves for medical claims only. And we can't really stress that part of it enough. I'm going to turn it over to Frank to talk a little bit more about local government.
Yeah, local government itself is a serious issue. Local officials deal with real issues of governance. And for the most part, they're pretty good. Next slide, Pam. And the town's view, though, of the Board of Ed is that the towns collect the money, but the Board of Ed spends the money. And so when you think about it, you basically receive all your money, but you don't have to worry about balancing the budget with a tax rate. And that's one of the big differences between town side and the Board of Ed side. Okay, Pam? The Board of Ed is the agency of the state and therefore operates under different rules. Regional school districts have much more autonomy than other school districts, quite a bit more autonomy. But regional districts have multiple towns that must approve, not just one. So it's a two-edged sword because you have to go through 3 approvals from 3 different towns. Town officials get frustrated because they cannot control Board of Education finances. The town officials know they can say, hey, we're going to reduce the police department. We want to reduce public works. You're going to have to lay off a person. They can't do that with the Board of Ed. Board of Ed, here's your money. You have full authority to spend it as you see fit. And Board of Ed officials on our side, on the Board of Ed side, they get frustrated when town officials step in and try and control their finances. And so sometimes you have to tiptoe through tulips when you're dealing with this issue that can come up between the Board of Ed and the town. Okay, Pam? The town officials' view of Board of Education finances. I've had more town officials saying the Board of Ed spends like crazy on June 30th. They must have tons of money. They're always spending money on June 30th. And we don't like the Board of Education's finances. There changes, monthly changes every month. They change dramatically. And the Board of Ed just can't seem to control its financial records. What's wrong with that? And Board of Ed can live within the budget cuts. After all, they finished last year with a surplus. I remember one district I was working at had a Board of Ed member saying, let's cut our budget. After all, we gave money back to the town last year. Let's cut our own budget. We have too much money. And it told me immediately, here is a Board of Ed member did not understand education finances and the myriad of issues that Board of Education face. And we'll give some examples of how to work with town officials, help them understand that issue. Okay, Pam. And the Board of Education budgets have consequences. And then this little cartoon here, I don't get it. After all, the budget cuts to streamline the workforce. Why aren't we moving faster? When a cut is made in the budget, it does have ramifications. Budgets are just not numbers. They are policy documents that say where are the priorities for the Board of Ed, where they want to go, where are they going to be putting their money. Okay, Pam?
And I'm going to talk a little bit about the year-end balances. Don't end your year in a deficit and don't end your year with a surplus. Both can be problematic, but the bigger one, of course, is that state statute does not allow any of us to end our year in a deficit. it's really important that we monitor and watch our budgets very carefully throughout the year. And I think it's really necessary to make certain you do keep those lines of communication open with your towns. And even as a regional school district, if ever there's a need for a supplemental appropriation request, it's really important to give towns advance notice that things are really becoming problematic as soon as you possibly can, because it is affecting their town budgets as well. And I also do believe that we really can't win, because if we end our year with a surplus, to Frank's point, they do feel that perhaps we're asking for too much money to begin with. So they're really not completely understanding all of those variables that are affecting those year-end balances. And we kind of alluded to them earlier. But why do we end up perhaps with a surplus or a deficit? Never a deficit without some real reasons, those being really inundated with high-cost students for special education, a really incredibly unanticipated difficult winter with snowplow costs or heating costs that just could not possibly have been prepared for. And as I'm saying that, what's coming to my mind is that lovely blizzard we had with over 40 inches of snow, because I was with my regional school district, and I can't begin to tell you what it cost us for snow removal. There was just no place to put it. We had to bring in some really large equipment, and that really did affect our budget that year. But those are some of the costs that can affect your budget, the expenditure side. And we talked about that a little bit with the health insurance, but just the changes in teachers. And oftentimes in the past, we perhaps would have teachers resign or retire, particularly those that resigned maybe in October or November, took a little time to fill the position, maybe had a savings there with a long-term sub, perhaps even hired at a lower salary. I don't think we're finding that much these days, since we are all challenged in filling positions. But honestly, those are areas that if you just have a few teachers that fall into that category, you could possibly save $250,000. So sometimes it's really difficult for our town leaders in particular to understand that, because having been on the town side, if I have a police officer leave, and of course they have some steps, but there is no way you are saving that kind of money with that change in personnel in a department like that. Also, most variables that affect the budget occur in those major budget categories, the salaries, benefits, and special ed that we've talked about. And even after the final budget is approved, the district will continue to not only review program requirements, but we do work towards cost containment strategies. We prioritize our needs. We're always trying to make certain that we're getting the best bang for our buck. And we will always try to save our district's money. And on the revenue side, as we chatted briefly, we can also see unexpected additional increases, which isn't a bad thing. Additional tuition students that we just estimated, increased building rentals, more requests to use our buildings, and higher than estimated percentage paid in excess cost funds, which the new legislation at least should be telling us what our percentage is going forward. I know the legislature has to adjust because the funding isn't adequate at the moment. So I don't think the percentage will change, but we really don't know. And those are all favorable to our member towns. And any projected year-end balance. And while a regional school district doesn't physically hand money back over to towns, it does go back to the towns as an offset to their payments for the subsequent fiscal year. And that's in accordance with state statutes. I think it's really important to emphasize those areas. All yours, Frank.
Okay, back to the town view. The town view of Board of Education officials and their spending. And this is still prevalent in a lot of towns. I've come across this in many, many towns. Next one, Pam, please. Town officials do not understand the Board of Education budget and all the problems. And when I switched over to the Board of Education side, I was amazed. I just took me 2 years to fully comprehend the complexities and the issues that Board of Educations face with their budgets. It was much more complex than what I ever anticipated. When I went over to the Board of Ed side, I then looked at the town, and I found town trying to interfere with our Board of Education operations. And we had to sit down and diplomatically sit down with some of the key town officials and say, you know, this is really a Board of Education decision, not a town decision, but we hear you. I mentioned previously where town tries to keep Board of Education grants. In the regional district, the grants are coming directly to you, but there's a bunch of even smaller grants, you know, as to who gets to keep the money. You get a transportation grant coming in, who gets to keep that money? And there's other adult education, things like this that making sure there's an understanding of who really is entitled to keep the money. And sometimes the town will try to control Board of Education finances. And I've been in many districts when they're looking at upgrading their software. And there's even been a reluctance to have the same software as the town side because they're afraid the town will take over or really get involved with the Board of Education finances. And that's not the case because you can have the same system. A lot of towns have Munis system, both for the town side and Board of Ed side. And the Board of Ed can totally protect its side. Give the town viewing rights, but that they can't do anything, and that's protected by passwords. Okay, Pam. Board of Ed view of town officials. I am the town. I can control. Okay, Pam. And scenario. And when I speak to town officials, I present this scenario to them. I offer the following scenario. If you're doing your budget, assume all your town employees are police officers, nothing else. No public works, no parks and recreation, no town clerk, none of the others. How do you prepare the town budget then with this kind of a budget when all shifts, all our police have to be covered, except maybe the Sunday morning shift? 60% of your police officers are female. A substantial number are childbearing and rearing age. So in addition to vacation and normal sick time, how would they budget for overtime to cover the shifts 24/7? If faced with maternity leave, 6 weeks minimum, child rearing leave, and up to 15 days of sick time from day one, each year cumulative. These are some of the things that when I present this town officials, it starts the wheels turning that Board of Education really are a little bit different, not only because of the services they provide, but the complexities of their labor force are really different. Because when a teacher's out, you have to replace that teacher. You can get a sub in there temporarily, but then you got to watch the state rules about proper certification. And it just goes on and on and on. So anyway, I do present that to board officials, to town officials, so they have some idea of the complexities of what Board of Ed members face when they're trying to put their budget together. For Board of Education officials, take this is one suggestion. You can't quite do this in a regional district, but taking the Board of Education budget and convert the requested increase into the mill rate impact. Because town officials look at Board of Education numbers, and they don't know the issues involved with the education for the most part. And a lot of times they look at the number and look at the bottom line and say, what's the rate? What's the mill rate impact? And that's how they look at the Board of Education's budget. And a little tip I've picked up over the years, in an even number when there's no local elections, just so happens that mill rate tends to go up a little faster than in the odd years when there are local elections in the town. Just an observation that, I point out, you try and look at what fiscal years, and if you try to get a little more increase, you might be better off in an even number year than an odd number year. Okay, Pam?
Okay, I'm going to talk just briefly about monthly financial reports because it's really important, not only so that you are monitoring your fiscal year budget. I think as Board of Education members, it's critical that you do look at these reports and understand the information that they're providing. And they should include your original budget appropriation, any transfers, year-to-date expenses, encumbrances, and your current account balance. And your report should be in a simplified format, 1 to 3 pages. And I think it's really important also to consider sharing them with town leaders and or just make certain they're on your website. It's important because it does show transparency. It does provide that information to any of the stakeholders, perhaps, who are interested in seeing that information. And it also prevents any of those end of year surprises that could come up. And end of year reporting, also, as I mentioned earlier, we do have the opportunity as we're preparing for the end of the year to make certain that everything is encumbered. We usually encumber our payroll earlier on in the year, but we have to make certain that we're adjusting those encumbrances for resignations for new employees, and make certain that if you do have balloon payrolls, those big amounts that are paid to teachers, usually teacher contracts allow for that opportunity, that those are encumbered correctly as well, because that can really skew your year-end balance. And that was one area that I really had to adjust going from the town side to the Board of Ed. When you look at a town budget, monthly financial report, you can basically go down your column of percentages remaining year to date or spent year to date, and you can really get a good feel. And you should. If it's December 31st, more than likely you've spent 50% of each salary line. Well, that's never the case on the school side. When you're looking at that column, the percentages are all over the place because you don't know if a teacher chose a 22 payout, 26, or a balloon payment. And that was something that I really had to adjust to. So it gives you a lot of information, and it's important to understand that information you're getting. And it's also worthwhile to prepare a list for the board for spending if you are projecting a surplus, and make certain that you are reviewing line item transfer policies of your board and adhering to them. And it's important that you watch those off the book accounts, like your health insurance account, reserve fund, because sometimes you don't, again, want any surprises, and you want to make certain that you are adequately prepared for whatever that story is as you're wrapping up your year. And of course, you're preparing for the EFS, the Education Finance System report. That is formerly the ED-001 report. And all of this information needs to be tied up and prepared so that that report can be completed by the end of August. And of course, while you're doing all this, you're preparing for all those wonderful requests from the auditors, which I know Terry knows all too well firsthand. The other major accounts that really should be paid attention to is food service, mostly self-funded. It really needs to be able to take care of itself financially. You should monitor your lunch costs and whether student costs need to be increased. There is a state report that comes out each year that you have to do the calculation for to make certain that you are in compliance and that you don't have more than like 3 months of operating expenses in the account. And this is an area that's very highly regulated through federal and state law. So there is monitoring that goes on throughout the year. And then, of course, student activity fund. Those are also governed by general state statute. And it's important that you really do have some controls in place. Best practice is to run it through your district office financial software rather than like QuickBooks. And I am guilty right now. My district has QuickBooks and we're trying to get it onto our financial software. And also for a vast array of reasons. But one is that oftentimes a school official may be issuing W-2s and 1099s and not collecting information from the various schools with student activity funds that perhaps are paying the same vendors, and they really should be combined into one 1099. It's important to have an area where districts really need to stay on top of, but it's important to have a really good process and strong guidelines, which personally I happen to know Amity has excellent handbook and guidelines because I've copied them many times in other districts. So I appreciate that. There was obviously a lot of thought that went into that development, and I know it's been improved upon as well. And that brings us to the audit. We do suggest that even particularly as Board of Education members, that you really do take a look at your annual audit. I think sometimes we underestimate the amount of information that you can see and learn in your audits. This is just two examples. The top one, if you look across to the far right side, the school cafeteria is doing very well. The bottom example shows the following funds had fund deficits, and the school lunch program is there. Again, just casually going through your audit, you would find this kind of information, and it would just allow you insight to perhaps areas that you want to really perhaps explore a little bit more. And don't forget that the annual audit also comes with a management letter that provides those constructive suggestions to improve accounting controls and administrative practices. And this letter can also give our school leaders a heads up on any areas of concern that should also be closely monitored. Board policies, very important. Something that I think boards of education do a great job with, and that's having policies as written guides, providing that degree of discretion in decision making, but also it does truly define the goals of the organization. What does the Board of Ed want to accomplish for its community? And it helps the superintendent and her leaders to really meet those objectives. And then there's regulations that really just spell out how that policy should be carried out.
Yeah, Pam, if I might jump in for a minute on the board.
Certainly.
I've gone into several districts and I started looking at their policies, particularly the 3000 series, which deal with finance and business operations on a slide you have up now. And I look at the date when they were revised, and some of the policies are 30 years old, 35 years old, have not been reviewed, have not been updated, and they have limits. Anything over $5,000 has to go out to bid. And it's just some of the rules and regulations are pretty archaic. And so, it's a credit to school district when their board policies are fairly recent because there have been so many changes over the years that have taken place. So just as a side note on that.
Well, that's an excellent point. And the area that really oversees and guides us on school finance and operations is the 3000 series, the business and non-instructional operations. So it's always worthwhile to take a good look at those policies, to update them, to make certain that they really are guiding your district in the way that you want to see your district, the direction you want to see your district move in. As a former board member, I always remember that we are the policymakers, and that should really be one of the areas that when you first become a board member, you should probably spend the time to familiarize yourself with and make sure that they truly do reflect your beliefs and what you want to accomplish. And lastly, for me, is the capital non-recurring reserve fund. I know that this is something under General Statute 10-51 that is available to regional school districts. You may establish the reserve fund to finance specific capital improvement projects or acquisition of any specific piece of equipment. And there is a cap on it at 2%, which was increased just a couple of years ago. It used to be 1%. Non-regional boards of education, just as an informational point, they can establish a non-lapsing education fund with that same 2% cap. Their funds can only come, however, from unexpended funds in the prior fiscal year's operating budget, and General Statute 10-248 governs that one. Frank, our hot spot.
Again, some of the things Pam and I run into in some hot spots and non-fields. In one Board of Ed district, I worked into the depth that was running more than one fiscal year, but was not apparent. Some dollars were charged off to a separate self-insurance account, which was not part of the Board of Education's operating budget. And when I went in and found that there was a transaction on June 30th, transferring money to balance the Board of Education budget on June 30th, and on July 1, the exact amount was transferred back to the self-insurance fund. It got really sticky. And I called the auditors and I said, what is this? And they said, well, it's in the audit. Well, come to find out, the board never read their board policy book that said they shall meet with the auditor and review the audit every year. And they had not met with the auditor, reviewed the audit in years. And it really created quite a problem. One district I was in, there was a massive school deficit, a school lunch program carried on town books. The superintendent was not aware, since there have been changes in superintendents. And this was like $600,000 was just sitting there because the town held the cash. It was buried with all the other town funds. But these are things we have to watch out for. And then balancing Board of Education budget by transferring money on June 30th to the Board of Education budget and reversing those entries to the off-book accounts, the ones I just mentioned, what was taking place. School districts. I went in one district where they were paying teachers full pay for child rearing, and they misinterpreted what FMLA meant. Though they thought it required salaries, just benefits. So every teacher that had a baby, the teacher not only got paid for having the baby, then they were taking 3-4 months off with pay for child rearing. And when I brought this to the superintendent of schools, she was very good. And she said, well, I'm going to issue a new policy. And the new policy is effective 10 months from now, we will not pay full salary under FMLA if a person goes out on child rearing, just the benefits, which is what FMLA specifies. And that was quite an eye-opener. And the big thing I run into is understanding the difference in payment as an employee versus an independent contractor. And you have to be very careful on this, both on the town side and on the Board of Education side. And the State Labor Department is very clear as to what constitutes an employee. And there's 4 different guidelines that they have that they look for, whether it really is an employee or really is it an independent contractor. So again, these are just some of the things that we're touching on, that the complexities in the Board of Education budget as well as on the town side.
And actually, your first one here, Frank, kind of ties into that. The school is paying the choir director and athletic person out of a student activity fund. Again, you can get into whether that person is an employee or an independent contractor. I can assure you in these cases, they are employees. And if you're paying them through student activity funds, which really should not be happening, you're not taking out the proper taxes. So you're going to have issues with the IRS and the state. And it won't be included in their W-2, which actually can hurt the employee because they're not getting credit for those earnings. And I'm going to just comment on the next one as well. The tax consequences of benefits such as mileage allowance, district vehicle, life insurance. I too have had experience in previous districts where it was difficult to get the individuals who were entitled to mileage allowance within their contracts to understand that that was a taxable benefit. And I actually went through an IRS audit during one of my previous districts. And fortunately, I had learned a lot of this and corrected things when I got there, and we passed with flying colors, I'm very happy to say. But I learned a lot as well. And the mileage allowance has to be noted, has to be taxable. And while there is something called de minimis amount under the IRS, we had considered giving perfect attendance gift cards. And this particular IRS agent told me that if we gave anything significant, $100 or $200 gift cards, that was a taxable benefit. So there's all kinds of tax consequences that sometimes you just don't think about. And you really need to make certain that you're on top of it, dotting all those I's and crossing all those.
I had an individual employee one time that when the IRS changed the rules on taxation on mileage allowance and district vehicles, I had one employee just said, I don't want the vehicle. I don't want to pay the taxes. I got to pay for it. And I said, fine, just keep track of your mileage and we'll do your reimbursement. And as reimbursement, that won't be taxable, but you have to submit mileage records. So you had all these little eccentric things you got to watch out for. So and then the improper recording of carryover of 2-year federal grants and no knowledge of what was actually available. I've been into districts where they had a grant and they had no idea how much was carried over and what was available. And when I went into the financial software, I had trouble trying to figure out what was available because they didn't have good, strong bookkeeper. They didn't have a good, strong finances. They kind of bumbled along. So. And then cutting POs after June 30th and charging it back to the old fiscal year. This has been done often on the town side, and I found it on the Board of Education side. And changing the dates on the PO so they reflect that they were cut on June 30th. And that's an absolute no-no. And if the Board of Ed ever get close to a close audit, even a forensic audit, auditors can pick up on this. So my basic rule is you do not cut a PO after June 30th. Matter of fact, if you haven't spent it by March 1st or April 1st at the latest, you're going to lose it. He tells me if you had the money in your budget, you hadn't spent it, you're coming to the end of the school year and you haven't spent it. I generally put a memo out saying no more expenditures at the school level after April 1st. Only expenditures that will be allowed are those that are going to be incurring because we have a high school graduation coming up. And then after that, special permission is needed from the superintendent of schools or from the business manager if you want to spend any of your money after April 30th. And that helps tremendously trying to get a handle on what the balances are, where you are financially when you go into May and June.
And I think I might also add that helps the administration, the superintendent in her office, better utilize those dollars as well, because if a school by April is not using their allocation, then those funds should come back to the district to make decisions about things that truly are needed. And perhaps you held off, and we usually have a wish list, or we have areas of the budget that were presented early on that we reduce before we even get it to the Board of Ed. And it's important to keep those lists, because if you can help and support perhaps, Bethany Middle School maybe did not spend their fundings, but the Orange Middle School really needed something. Now you have that opportunity to support the other school.
When I go into these different boards of ed, one of the first things I look for is have they reconciled their accounting with the town? And you'd be surprised how often that is not done on a monthly basis and becomes critical because you go into June. I was in one district when the Board of Ed thought they had $250,000 and the town said, no, you don't. You have a deficit of $200,000. And it really is scary, really is scary. So a well-run financial operation is when you have the regular reconciliation with the town. And when I met with the town finance director in this case, he said, hey, look, I don't care what your records will say. Cash is king. Here's what the bank account says. You have to adjust to our records. And then the last thing is dealing with the MOAs, the memorandum of understanding or memorandum of agreement. What do they carried over your new labor contracts? Turnover of business administration, and you change superintendents. And they may not aware of agreements that have been made in the past, and you can get blindsided. If a union member picks it up at a critical time and it's still a valid MOA, so you need to be careful. The record keeping of your HR department, or if you don't have one, in your finance office, make sure you're up to date as to what those signed memorandums of agreements are, because they have as much strength as the actual wording in the contract itself. So these are just some of the things, and we could spend a whole night just on HR itself, but we're not going to go into it. We're going to be wrapping up in a few minutes here. So I think we're almost there. Pam?
Sorry, but I'm losing my voice here, so I'm going to
Okay,
let Frank take over.
Yeah. Not spending down grants at the end of their grant year, really important to spend down the grants at the end of their 1-year grant or 2-year. And you have to understand what the window is that when you're allowed to spend them down. Financial records mostly maintained on Excel spreadsheets. I went into one district and it was a nightmare. They had excellent spreadsheets, absolutely excellent spreadsheets. But when I looked at the financials, they didn't reconcile with what was in the financial systems itself. And so I always recommend to boards of ed and to the business managers, when you give the Board of Education a financial report, you should also make sure you include the financial record from your software, whether it's in Visions or Munis or whatever software you're using. The Excel spreadsheets are nice. They can simplify things, but you want to have the backup and make sure that they're reconciled between the Excel spreadsheet and the financial records. No backup to a key person. When I went into one district and the key person left, everything was it was just one person operation, basically, with a bookkeeper. And then when that person left, it was a nightmare. And it got worse 2 weeks later when the bookkeeper left. And it was an absolute nightmare just trying to figure out what took place on there. I found that superintendents and Board of Ed members are not fully familiar with the Board of Education written policies on financial operations and purchasing. And one district I mentioned previously, the Board of Ed never met with the auditor or read the audit reports. And the Board of Ed members have an obligation. You supervise the superintendent, that's your main function, and that to make sure that what comes up in the auditor and what it is, and you meet with the auditors and review with the superintendent about what the audit is saying, so you have a good handle on what's in the audit. In one district I went into, the town was holding $800,000 in a special fund for Board of Education, excess money that had built up on the town side, and the Board of Ed did not know it. And when I brought it to the special ed director's attention, she cried because she had layoff people. Her budget was so tight. And here was $800,000 for special ed that could have been used, and she was not aware of it. So you need to always take a look at the town audit, go through the audit, read the audit. I love going through the town audit to see what kind of fund balance, how big is the fund balance carrying? And the audit, the auditors, the financial institutions, Moody's, Standard & Poor's, saying, it should roughly have a 10%. And I've met with town officials who are running 17, 18 fund balances, and they start crying poverty. And I say, that's a little bit high on the surplus money you're sitting on, So the other problem I run into is no bidding on major items. And they said, well, we've always dealt with this company. Why shouldn't we be doing it? And I said, is there any documentation or any bidding that is done on it? Oh, no, they're local. They're good guys. Okay. And then last thing, lack of knowledge on prevailing wages. That can really blindside you, because if you work on a project and you did not factor in prevailing wage, which can add 20, 25% to your costs, that can create a real problem. So these are just some of the things I've run into on the different boards of ed in the town side. And when it's course that Pam made reference to, and that Dr. Bears is taking, we go over in detail a lot of these issues that from the financial point of view, you need to be cognizant of and be careful of.
And I think after all of this, you are probably thinking to yourself, Good grief. I would tell you that the one thing you should really be grateful for is that you do have a great team there. I've gotten to know your superintendent a bit and very impressed. And I have known Carrie Loomis for a while as a colleague, and I just know that you are in really good hands. But I think it's important as Board of Education members to have that confidence in those people that are really driving all of this and are doing the day-to-day tasks and are responsible for them and know what they're doing. So there is a lot, and there are a lot of those minefields. Frank, I'll let you just.
Okay, and that's all, folks. That concludes our remarks, and Pam and I are certainly available for any questions or comments that anyone has. And thank you, Dr. Bears, for having us this evening. It really is. It's always fun to do these things. So, yes.
Well, thank you. And again, I'll just remind board members, if you don't have your camera turned on, then you're not showing up on our live stream. So it's like you're not even here. Again, we respect if you cannot turn your camera on, but we will open it up at this point to questions. I think Mr. Davis and I can both kind of keep an eye on the screen and see if anybody has hands raised while you still have Pam and Frank here. And I'll turn it over for questions. Dr. Turner.
I'll start it off. I'm really glad to hear that you think that Amity is doing so well with its procedures. I'm wondering if you have resources you can point us to on how to communicate the complicated school budgeting requirements and mandates in a way that people, taxpayers, voters, community can understand. That doesn't sound like us just making confusing stuff up.
It's actually a really great question, and I like the way you framed it. Honestly, I often say I don't have the magic answer for that. However, having said that, I think the important thing is communication and trying to get that information out there. Just as the slides pointed out with all the variables that occur, I don't think we, in my profession as a school business official, I don't think we talk about that enough. And sometimes you wait until the year ends while you're explaining why you have perhaps a year-end balance. It almost looks like you're giving them excuses rather than the real reasons that these happen. So I think we, myself included, need to do a better job at the beginning of our budget sessions and our workshops and saying that these are estimates. I will tell you the district I'm with now, I've only been there for a few years, and when I first saw the cover page of our budget, it said estimated expenditures. And that is what the state statute says. And I have to admit, I never really thought of presenting it that way. And it was my predecessor who did that. And I gave it some thought and reread the statute and thought that's a very good idea. But honestly, I could do a better job in helping my town leaders understand that they are estimates and these numbers can change. They can change for the better and they can change for the worse. So I think communication is really the key there.
Good point, Pam. And one of the things I like to point out in the estimates, especially when you're 18 months after you started preparing the budget. When you look at when you're preparing the budget in October, November, and it goes the whole following fiscal year for 12 months, so that in effect, you're preparing estimates that were almost 18 months old in the budget. And look what's happened with energy. Look what's happened now with the latest revelation in Connecticut about electrical rates now on the generation side starting to double. I mean, oil prices. There are so many variables you just don't have control over. And you have to remember, people, that yes, we have a deficit or we have a surplus in this budget because this estimate was prepared 18, 19, maybe even 20 months ago, or maybe 14, 15 months. I mean, it's difficult, I have a crystal ball. And so you just have to watch for these items. And the other point I found, sometimes we have too much knowledge and we try and convey that. And if you can keep it simple, the basic KISS rule, bullet points, key points. What's the major point you want to convey to your audience? And try and simplify that as much as you can so that they get the big picture. And then you can always follow up with more detail after that.
So Dr. Sudir, I saw you had a hand raised. Make sure you unmute.
Thank you. So I have a following question. Whether we use the word estimate or whether we use any other word, there is a prior that the mean or the expected value, the mean should be around 0, right? Like the difference should be 0. And that's not the case. So that is true if we talked about prices for gas, we talked about prices for labor, all of those that could go up or down. The challenge, at least in our school district, is being that we always have a surplus. And the reason is most of the stuff comes from the stuff that you talked about, like, the staff going on leave or not being paid, not having to be paid, or like, somebody, and we can talk about grants, which also come only one-sided, right? Because those two are always going to push you towards the positive. And then there is the third thing, the special ed, where again, you budget based on, and this is the hardest part for me to understand. Why is it that the special ed needs end up always being positive, right? There are good reasons one can think about, but it almost always is the case that it ends up positive. Well, I have some thoughts on this. I'd love to hear your thoughts on why is it this expected value is always a surplus rather than the 0?
In my opinion and in my experience, I've had situations where I've had really almost a significant deficit, and I've had many years of surpluses. And it's always the same rationale. It's always because, as you point out, it salaries significantly. And those positive years of special education should be celebrated because, believe me, most districts are not experiencing that. But when you think about it with salaries, I've had town leaders actually make a reverse comment to me that, well, if you know historically that you have had this kind of savings from salaries, why aren't you reducing your salary budget? That to me is risky, not a best practice, because I personally feel, and I think you will find I'm also involved with the National School Business Official Organization. And the thought process is you budget for every known cost within reason. You look at historical data, but if you have 100 teachers that are hired, have contracts, you need to budget for those teachers. If they come and go throughout the year and that results in a surplus, well, that is money that, again, I realize the carryover for a regional school district offsets the costs of the town and doesn't go directly back to them, but they get a credit for it. And they do ultimately get that money back. Unfortunately, that kind of information could be skewed however people want to express it. But I often say that school business officials in particular, Terry's position, my position, Frank's position, we are facts and figures people, and we don't get into the political side of it. We want to be as transparent and honest as possible to our board members, our superintendent, and our town leaders. And we're going to budget appropriately. And we're going to tell you the good news at the end of the year when there's a surplus. And I do understand the comments that are made. Again, don't forget, I was the finance director for the town of Orange for 4 years. So I firsthand know, yes, Amity always seemed to have a surplus. And I think there was very good reason for it. And I think the more I got to understand school budgets, the more I could understand the reason for it. But unfortunately, I think there's always going to be the people out there that you're never going to convince.
I
If
agree
I
with
can
that.
maybe jump into, and Pam and Frank, maybe you can weigh in on this concept a little bit, but We have often talked in Amity about our ability to have homegrown programs. So to be able to take special education students who have kind of above average needs and to bring them back into Amity and support them within the district, which when we are able to do that is less costly than if we send them to an out-of-district placement. Part of the reason why Amity is able to do that is because the larger of a school district you are, the better capable you are of having those specialized programs. And maybe that's something that you can confirm. But when you are a smaller school district, you don't necessarily, it's not necessarily fiscally beneficial to run very specific specialized programs. So I do wonder if we end up in a unique situation where coming from 3 rather smaller elementary districts who perhaps can't run specialized programs, we have them, but until we actually have the child in our system, we don't know if they're even going to be a good fit for the specialized program that we perhaps want to put them into, which might be why we uniquely return more kids to an in-district program, because it takes us a little bit of time to get there. But I don't know if either of you could just speak to kind of the practicality of running specialized special ed programs as an in-district program, as opposed to sending them to out-of-district placements. And if there's some sort of tipping point that we're maybe missing, given the size of the 3 elementary districts and the size of our 712 district.
Dr.
Yeah,
Burns, can I just clarify
Yeah.
a little bit so that they can anticipate a little bit of that question myself? So is that okay? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So the question I have, and I think if I try to understand what you just said, is that in the absence of information about how we can offer the best and the most cost-effective quality of education for our special ed students, when they come from outside, we have probably the upper bound of what the costs might be, because we've been used to sending people out of district and things like that. And that's where we start. And we get to downward revise it as we learn more information. Is that the right interpretation of what you just said?
Yes, I think so. Because again, we don't really know the student until they're our student. So it takes that crossover from being literally enrolled in the elementary district to then being enrolled in Amity, at which point we know that student better and we know if they are a better match for the programs that we offer within the district.
So if we were a K through 6 or a K through 12 district, we would not be having this cliff where we have students with needs that could not be met in-house at the elementaries, that we have to spend time budgeting them as though they will be out. And some of them we can bring back, but we don't know how many. So
That
every
was
single year,
beautifully summarized.
Okay.
That's a bullet point.
Okay. So every single year this will happen. There will always be kids coming in here, and some of them that we can't predict, we will be able to pull back. So from that point, that is likely always to be a surplus chunk or a unexpended,
Yes,
an unpredicted one.
correct. I think so. And again, I don't want to make it seem like the elementary schools don't do a good job trying to convey this to us, but their situation and the supports they can offer is so different from our situation and the supports we can offer, that I do think that may be a unique situation that we experience. And again, I think it's really contingent perhaps on the ability of a larger district to provide certain supports that smaller districts can't.
Are the other regional districts K through 12?
I've been with 2 that have been K through 12.
Yeah, the majority are K-12.
Okay, so this is really unique. Thank you. This is very
And
helpful.
I think you're all right on target. If you are in a situation where you are being told that these students are coming from the elementary school to 7th grade, I believe that's where your middle school begins, and they are more than likely being outplaced, or they are outplaced now, you can't possibly not budget for that cost. And as you assess them once they get to the middle school and you determine that you're able to accommodate their special needs in districts, which in my opinion is a wonderful advantage for that student, because I think that is what we ultimately want for all of our students, is to be able to be educated within their own districts and at home. And if you're able to do that and save money, it just seems like a win-win. And I do recognize that that adds to a year-end balance that perhaps you do get some criticism for. But again, I think that it's facts and figures. And when you show that kind of information, you show the value of those in-house programs, which I am 100% in favor of. And it's wonderful that Amity is able to provide those, because so many districts try to, and just, you do need to have money to get them started sometimes. And you simply, many districts don't have the ability to service the students in those ways. And I think we're finding certain areas within special education that we are finding more and more students who have needs in those areas. And if we can handle them within our own districts, again, I just feel it's a wonderful win, particularly if you're saving money at the same time.
Yeah, and we talked about earlier in one of the slides, we talked about the woodchucks in the pile, and the special ed is one of the woodchucks, because it has these unanticipated expenses that you are mandated by law to provide the services. And you're better off having a surplus. You can bring those students back in district versus having to pay for an out-of-district cost. It can get very, very, very expensive, and you won't get reimbursement for it, particularly if it happens after May 1st. So you have May and June exposure of a child suddenly moving into district with heavy needs. And I've seen numbers approaching $300,000 for one child. For one child, a special ed, really serious special ed costs. So this is where you need a good special ed director, and the special ed director sits down with the superintendent and the business manager, and they go over where the special ed director needs to place that child. And some of these places are very expensive, and plus transportation costs. So I don't know if we answered your question or not, Mr. Sudhir, but that's our shot.
I think this was very helpful. I think it confirmed some of the information I have gathered over the last few months, but I think it was helpful to hear that from you as well. Thank you.
Good.
Mr. Brow, I think you're raising your hand, but you're on
I
profile.
Oh, can you see me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I noticed one of your slides at the bottom mentioned returning surpluses to towns, and it said something to the effect of, for the next fiscal year. And that's something we've been discussing recently. As we have done in the past, once we have a surplus coming from, year one, we audit it, and then about midway through year two, we return those funds to the town. Is that your understanding for regional schools? Is that because it goes along with the state statute, which says the money must be spent for the next fiscal year?
Correct. So if you do have a year-end balance, you are technically using those funds to offset the costs for the subsequent year, which lessens the net cost to your town. And I believe that's exactly how you're doing it in accordance with state statute.
Yeah, I think one thing we've done a little maybe different was I think at some point we've done a money transfer rather than just lessen the amount that they pay towards the rest of that year. So I think that's something we're talking about changing, but we're still deciding as a board.
Okay, either way, in local education agencies don't actually get all the cash up front, or, they aren't on those distributions monthly or however you set it up with your
Yeah,
members'
monthly.
accounts.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, and we don't give cash physically back, we just don't ask for it. So the towns
Right.
hold it. So it's very similar, But so when we use the term returning money to the town, there's different ways that it occurs, but at the end of the day, those funds are returned to the town in some form or manner in accordance with statute.
Good. Thank you so much, Pam.
Mhm.
Are there any more questions? From my point of view, I really like to say we appreciate it. We needed that. I know we're going to have your presentation available to some of our board members who weren't able to come and listen. But it's also going to be available to the public, which may be an important area for them to hear, as well as our local boards of finance who may be interested in understanding the educational side of what's going on in the regional district. So we thank you very much. We also thank you for working with our superintendent. It makes a big difference for us for her to have this type of information, and makes things a lot easier for us in understanding what we're doing with the budget. So if there, Dr. Byers, do you have anything else?
No, I think that is it.
Okay,
In our
so,
pleasure. Thank you.
right. So we will adjourn our special meeting at 7:38 this evening, and wish everyone a good evening, and we will see you shortly. Take care.
Thanks, everyone, for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.